Penguin Random House Audio presents The Accidental Life, An Editor's Notes on Writing and Writers by Terry McDonell, read for you by Jason Culp. Part 1. Go in Fear of Abstractions. Ezra Pound. My Editor. There is nothing finer than deciding to write. And if, like me, you were a young writer in the 1970s, there was almost too much to write about. Norman Mailer actually complained about this. Vietnam had a lot to do with it, because friends had been there, or had gone and weren't coming back. And there was the movement, however you defined it, and the music and the drugs, and everyone drank and had sex with each other. No one wants to read any more about that, but there was a shocking inevitability to the way things were turning out. Something else was always there, too, just beneath the surface, no matter how uncomfortable or embarrassing it was to define. Writers talked about it, about writing and being writers. Ken Kesey said, "I'd rather be a lightning rod than a seismograph." That's the kind of writer we all wanted to be. What if writers were the story? What an idea. Depending on how well you wrote and how often you changed jobs or assignments, other writers came in and out of your life. Some of them were already famous, and others would be soon, but celebrity didn't matter because you knew something together, the private thrill that comes from writing a clear and unique sentence, the craft of it. James Salter liked to rub words in his hand, to turn them around and feel them. Writing is exactly that, and there is no work like it, because it is so complicated to know when you are done. Riffing about writing journalism, Renata Adler wrote, in her novel Speedboat, about giving a piece of sugar to a raccoon, which in its odd fastidiousness would wash that sugar in a brook till there was nothing left. Editors can help with that. Before I became an editor, I had an intuition about what readers wanted. They wanted to read whatever I wanted to write. Sure they did. I just needed a little editing sometimes. Every editor I ever had, including the bad ones, was strict about a piece living or dying by its language, even if they couldn't write themselves, which of course they couldn't. That's why they were editors. Or so I thought until I met the editor who made me an editor. His name was Bob Sherrill, the other Bob Sherrill. He used the other to distinguish himself from Robert Sherrill, the writer who had just published The Saturday Night Special, a book about handguns so smart that the other Bob Sherrill said you just wanted to hold it up to your forehead. The other Bob Sherrill was Robert Sherrill's editor for a while, and he was my editor, too. At 41, he was known in the magazine world to be crazy and shrewd and kind all at once. He was said to be especially good with young writers, and was also known for outdressing them in his white high-top Chuck Taylors with the fluorescent red laces, untied, his baggy blue and white seersucker suits and his black T-shirts, a green and pink silk bandana around his neck, and a black watch beret over his shaggy strawberry blonde hair. Plus his Ray-Bans, rain or shine. Bob was colorful. He was also a bit surreal, a flipped-out literary ice cream man, but handsome, too, and women liked him. And I worked for him as a reporter at a startup weekly called L.A. that we were saying was like, the Village Voice, but for Los Angeles. Bob never said that, though. He had come west on an editorial whim, his phrase, after some turbulent years in New York at Esquire, where he had been a sly packager and helped midwife, ditto, journalistic innovations from dubious achievements to that genre-cracking run of pieces that defined the new journalism. Tom Wolfe, Gay Talese, Truman Capote, Mailer, every writer in the country knew the growing roll call and wanted to be on it. Bob had edited many of them and liked to talk about how they got their story ideas. "From editors, of course," he would say. riding shotgun with a Mexican beer between his knees, motoring around Southern California with one or another of the young writers who worked for him. Bob had hired me thinking he was getting a solid wire service reporter, which I was not, although I had spent time in Beirut and Amman during the 1970 Jordanian Civil War that became known as Black September, and had been picked up by AP news features in New York. What I was ambitious, and that's what Bob said he liked about my story ideas. That, and that I had been reading Esquire since high school, was a little older than the other reporters, and had the best car. Bob would never let you use eventful in a piece, but this particular day was that for me, driving us both down the coast in my Fiat convertible to a party in Dana Point thrown by a former AP reporter named Pat McNulty, who had reinvented himself as the editor of Surfer magazine. I knew McNulty, and the invitation had come through me. When I told Bob about it, I'd said there would be surfers for sure, but also journalists, maybe a couple novelists, and also people in the new MFA program at UC Irvine, where McNulty was teaching. If there was a West Coast literary scene, a word Bob liked, to match up with Tom Wolfe's recent piece on surf culture, The Pump House Gang, this would be it. I knew Bob would be the center of the party, as he always was, wherever writers and alcohol came together. All the way down the Pacific Coast Highway, we talked story ideas. Bob was warming up for the writers who would soon be circling for a chance to talk to him, all of them wanting to break trail for an assignment from Esquire, where he was still a contributing editor. Somewhere near Laguna Beach, I said something about how anybody interested in journalism, like me, would want to read a piece by someone like Wolfe or Talese or Mailer or anyone good on Bob himself and what was about to happen to him at the party. Bob had a way of cocking his head when he was enjoying whatever he was thinking. That's what he did then, and told me he thought I thought like an editor, and we should both think about that. Think about me becoming an editor. Think about making magazines. Think about monkeys jumping out of boxes, he said. That's what good editors do. I had not heard that one, but figured he was talking about jack-in-the-box surprises. I nodded. He cocked his head again. I waited. Plus, he said, taking another pull from his Tecate, good editors never have to drive. End it. Word count, 320. Editing is about ideas, but it is mechanical, too. You have to get under the hood of the language, and editors use many tools. I'll start by leaving the word counts at the top of my chapters, because as an editor, I always wanted to know how much I was about to read. This helped me evaluate pacing, or the lack of it, in a piece. Writers were sensitive to this once they found out how I worked, and were generally attuned to length, even if they weren't being paid by the word. At all the magazines I edited, Rolling Stone, Esquire, Sports Illustrated, et al., feature stories were assigned at a specific length, usually 4,000 words, and most writers would take that over 5,000 and say they were close. Others would come in under 3,000 and say the same thing. It was mysterious why being direct about the number of words they were filing was so difficult, but I am sure it had more to do with alchemy than lack of discipline. Before Microsoft Word, stopping to count how many words you'd typed could be refreshing, like stopping to make tea or smoke a cigarette. Now, doing a word count can have a slot machine kick to it if you have the discipline not to do it every time you hit save. None of this matters if the piece is good, and that's determined by voice and narrative, not length. Going long is always more ambitious and usually more fun. This was true before lengthy pieces became creative nonfiction or narrative journalism, and it is true now that we've finally debunked the simple-minded web assumption that no one will screen read anything longer than a news capsule. No writer I ever edited wanted to go short anyway. Neither do I, but I also know that the best pieces seem to find their own length. That's the alchemy.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?